Hello and welcome back to the channel. In the last video, we looked at how to build the recipe details page of our recipe app. In this video, we'll be looking at how to build the favorites page of our recipe app. Let's have a look at the page you'll be building. So the favorites page initially displays this UI when no recipe has been added to our favorite list. Let's try adding a recipe to this list. So in order to add a recipe to your favorites, locate the recipe you want to add. In this case, I'm going to click on this recipe and then click on the heart button over here. So click on this. This will add the recipe to your favorites. Now let's have a look at the favorites page now. So the favorites page displays the recipe in this 3-card form. On the favorites page, clicking on a recipe takes you to the recipe details page where you can unfavorite it or remove it from your favorites. But we're not going to do that now. Let's try to add more recipes under the same category. In this case, pork. So home, and let's try to find the pork category from our list of categories here. Let's try to add more recipes from the pork category. I'm going to click on this, add it to my favorite, go back. Click on this, add it to my favorites, go back. Now let's check out the favorites page. So back here on the favorites page, we see that our 3 cards are filled with the image of the recipes we added. Now clicking on each card will take us to the respective recipe page. So clicking on this takes us to the recipe details page for that particular recipe, and clicking on this also takes us to its respective page. Now let's try to do one more thing, adding 2 more recipes under the same category. So back here, let's search for pork and add this to our list. Now the favorites page shows something a little bit different. We have the 3rd card showing us the number of recipes we have. So we have 3 recipes plus 2 more. Now clicking on the 3rd card will take us to a page which shows us all the recipes under that category. From here, we can click on a recipe. That will still take us to the recipe details page, and we can remove it from our favorite. So click, remove, go back, and now it updates to +1, which means we have 4 recipes in total. We also have a see more button here that takes us to the same page where we see the total recipes we have under that category. When we add more recipes under different categories, they are going to be grouped by their category name. Go to favorites and we can see desserts over here, all grouped under their respective categories. And that is what we are going to build. It's an interesting and fun project. If you want to see more content like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comment section. Let's get right into this. In our last video, we ended on the recipe details page. The next functionality we're supposed to work on was bookmarking or adding to favorites. So in order to implement the favorites functionality, we must have a provider that manages everything related to favorites. So retrieving all our favorite recipes, adding a recipe to our favorites, removing a recipe from our favorites. All this needs to be handled by provider. So let's quickly set one up. Over here under providers, I'm going to create a new provider and I will call this provider Bookmarks provider. Of course, as always, you can call it anything you want. This bookmark provider would be slightly different from the providers we are used to in this project because the functionalities we would want to implement are slightly different from the ones we are used to. All these while we've just been pulling data from an API. This time around, we are not going to work with APIs, but then we want to perform CRUD operation on a local data we have. So how does this look like in Riverpod? In order to set up a provider like this, we are going to use Riverpod async class. So this is what you are looking for if you have the Riverpod extension installed. Riverpod async class. Now this is going to give you some boilerplate, and what we need to do is to fill it with the name of our provider. So bookmarks, and just like always, Riverpod would automatically add the name provider to your provider, so you don't have to add the provider to it. Let's fix our import statement, and over here let's add a dummy return. So we are going to return a list for now and put an empty list over here. We need to add a path declaration. And if you watch any of our videos, you should be able to do this by now. In case you missed it, I'll leave a link down in the description for you to watch the last video or the previous videos you missed. So we have path and the name of the provider .gen.dat. So that is the structure. In this case, bookmarks provider.gen.dat. Now Riverpod will generate some codes that would help our provider work. So all the boilerplate code we used to write in the previous versions of Riverpod will be generated for us. Now in order to generate this, you need to make sure you have build runner added to your dependencies. So if you don't have it, you need to add a build runner to your pub spec. So under dev dependencies, you have build runner. You should add Riverpod generator here as well. That's all you need. Now open your terminal and let's run the command that run build runner watch. Now the watch command makes sure that we don't run this command again whenever we are creating a new provider. So we can see that we no longer have any errors in our code and we can minimize our terminal. So from here, the build method is the first function that gets called when we first use this provider. So it's the same as using the future provider we've been working with. The build method is the future provider we've been working with without any other function. So something like this is the same as having Riverpod future list and probably maybe giving it a name. So bookmarks, something like this. Yeah. So this over here is the same as this. The only difference in this case is that we are allowed to add other methods to this provider. Whereas when we use the short form, which is what we have over here, we can't add any extra functionality apart from the main function the provider performs. That would be very clear soon. So what we are going to do over here is that we are going to have methods that perform certain operation when we call them. The first one will be adding a recipe as favorite. So this is going to be a function void add, and I'm just choosing to call it add instead of anything else. And this would take in a complete recipe. So complete recipe, and we can call it a mail, then add this mail to a local database, and we will get back to this function to complete it very soon. We are going to also have one for remove. So remove, instead of we passing the whole complete recipe, we can just pass the ID of the recipe and then remove this mail from a local database. We are going to have one more function called is bookmarked. Now, how do we know a recipe has been bookmarked? We have to check our local database to make sure that our recipe is there. So this is going to return a boolean is bookmarked, checks our local database and returns if it has it or not, which is going to be a boolean. Now, what local database are we using in this case? We are using get storage. So if you missed the first video, we talked about get storage and how we are going to use it on our favorites page. So all you need is to add get storage to your pubspec.yaml if you don't already have it. If you have get storage added, the next thing we need to do is to make sure we've initialized get storage in our main function. So let's go to main.dat, and over here, just before run app, we need to make sure that get storage is initialized. So we are going to convert this to an async function and add an await get storage dot init function here. And this is going to make sure that get storage is up and running before we even run our app. Now back to the bookmark provider, we can make a reference to get storage. So I'm going to create a variable here, which is going to be a private variable storage, and set it to get storage. And if you are familiar with Hive, shared preferences, or any other storage, you shouldn't have problem using get storage. And when we are adding a recipe to our local database, in this case get storage, what we are going to do is convert that recipe data we have into a map, a form that can be stored in get storage. If you go to our complete recipe class, we don't have any way of converting a complete recipe to a map. We have one for converting JSON into a complete recipe, but we don't have complete recipe to a map. So let's quickly add that functionality. I'm going to create a function here, and this is going to return a map of string dynamic and call it to map. This will return a map with all the fields we need. ID is going to be ID, just like that. Name is going to be name. Image URL is going to be image URL. Category, just like that. When it comes to ingredients, we are not going to pass ingredients like this, because this is going to be a list of ingredients, which isn't a map. So we have to convert our ingredients, each of them, into a form that can be saved in get storage. So in order to do that, we are going to loop over our ingredients, and for each ingredient, we can convert it to a map. and we don't have a map here. What we rather have is to JSON. They are basically the same. We just decided to call it to JSON in this ingredient class. In order to be consistent, maybe we can call it to JSON here as well, and we call to JSON over here. Now we know map will return an iterable, so let's just convert it to a list like this. And this is going to be our to JSON method. Now back here in Bookmarks provider, we are going to save in our storage the mail using its ID as the key. We are going to write some data to our storage, but every data that we write to storage should have a key. In that sense, a way we can retrieve that particular data. So, right, and we need to have a key value. So the key in this case is going to be the ID of the mail, because we know IDs are going to be unique, and the value is going to be our mail.json. So this is going to return us a map version that can be stored easily in get storage. Now after storing this, there is a way, or there are so many ways we can notify our provider that something has changed internally. We want you to reevaluate, fetch the data again, or show the latest data. There are so many ways you can do that. But in order to keep this very simple, there is a method that Riverpod provides to us, which is called invalidate self. Now what invalidate self does is it will run this build method again and then fetch the latest data from get storage. We are going to work on this build method very soon, so that should be fine. So we are going to call ref.invalidate self. That means run the build method again. And when it comes to removing an item from the database, it should be very easy. So we are just going to call storage.remove and we pass in the ID of the mail. And we have to also make sure that we call ref.invalidate self so that we get the latest data from our database, which is get storage. In order to check if a recipe has been added to favorite, we just have to check if that recipe exists in our database. So to do that with get storage is quite easy. We have to return storage.hasData, and then the key is ID. Now the last thing we are going to work on is retrieving the actual data from our database. So I'm going to get everything in our database, in this case our mails. So maybe final mails is going to be storage.getValues. If this is null, I want it to default to an empty array or empty list. Now we don't want to return an empty list over here. What we want to do, so maybe we can change this to a list. Yeah, what we want to do is to convert our map into a complete recipe. So how do we do that? We have a way of converting from JSON to a complete recipe, but then converting from our local version into a complete recipe will be quite different. If that doesn't make sense, let me show you why. So within complete recipe, the way we convert from JSON into a complete recipe is a little bit different because of the data retained from the API. The data from the API is not well structured for our use case. So we do a lot of computation over here in order to get it in the structure we want before we return our complete recipe. When we are saving to our local database, we already have the well-structured data. So it's very easy converting everything to a map and saving it in our database. If we want to retrieve what we just saved in our database, we can't use the same complex process we used because the data is different. We are going to create a new factory constructor, which is going to be from Bookmark. That from Bookmark constructor will be responsible for converting a local mail into a complete recipe. Now let's have a look at that in code. So we are going to have factory complete recipe dot from Bookmark, and this is going to take a map of string dynamic. In this case, you can call it a JSON or anything you like to call it. And instead of doing any form of computation, we are just going to return a complete recipe and access the fields we passed to JSON. So just the names over here. So ID is this, name is this, image URL, we are accessing the image URL field, YouTube URL, ingredients, JSON ingredient.map. Now, in order to make that happen, I'm going to type this method map as ingredient, just like this, and now everyone is happy. So there's what we have over here. Now we get our values, we need to convert it back into a complete recipe because that's what the UI understands. I am going to return a list dot from maybe mails, and then for each of them I'm going to map mail, or anyhow you decide to call it, and call complete recipe from Bookmark, and finally convert it to a list because of the map. Now we have to update the return definition, so future or list of complete recipe, like this. Now that's all we need for our Bookmark provider. Really simple. Now let's try it out. So over here in recipe details page, let's try to access our bookmark provider. First, let's have a check for if the recipe is bookmarked so that we can show the right icon. So I'm going to create a variable here. Final is bookmark, and that is going to be ref dot, and there are so many ways you can do this. So we can either watch for the bookmarks provider and then check if it contains our recipe.id. There are some ways you can do this. But what I'm going to do is I have created a separate function for that. So ref.read bookmarks provider dot notifier dot is bookmark, and then we are going to pass in widget.recipe.id. Now the reason why we are using dot notifier over here is you use this when you want to get access to, let's say, a function that you've declared right within the provider. So if you look at the example they gave over here, for instance, you want to call increments when a button is tapped, and you can do that using the dot notifier. So without dot notifier, you can't access the methods we've defined. So dot notifier, and this will tell us this recipe has been bookmarked or not. So over here, we can show the appropriate icon based on this. So icon is going to be, if it's bookmarked, then we want to have the bold version of the icon, else we want to have the linear version or the light version. So icon stack plus linear dot hat, and when I save, we immediately see the linear version of the icon because this recipe hasn't been added to our bookmark. Now, how do we add a recipe to our bookmark? Within the onPressed, we have to check if the recipe is bookmarked. If it is bookmarked, we remove it. If it is not, we add it. So you can maybe do this in a separate function. You can maybe create a function called toggle, just pass the recipe ID to it, and then it does that check over here. There are so many ways you can do it. I prefer to use an if statement here. So if it's bookmarked, then I want to take it from my bookmark. So we are going to use ref.read because we want to call a method bookmarks provider.notifier.remove, and then we need to pass in the ID. So this ID is going to be widget.recipe.id. Else add it to our bookmark because it hasn't been bookmarked yet. So ref.read bookmarks provider.notifier.add our recipe, and notice we are passing a complete recipe. So from here, let's try to bookmark. Oh, and it seems nothing is happening. Good. So the reason why nothing happens is because this UI isn't updated when the state changes. So I went back and came to the same page, and now it's bookmarked. Let's click it again. No UI change. Go back, click on it, and we have a new status. The reason is that we are not watching this provider on any part of this page. So Riverpod does not rebuild the page when something changes. We are only calling methods that we've defined. So Riverpod doesn't know that, oh, okay, something has changed, I have to rebuild. The only way it knows is when we are watching. So Riverpod would specifically rebuild that component when something changes. So in order to do that, we can just add ref.watch bookmarks provider. Now this means that we are actively watching for updates for this bookmark provider and rebuild the UI accordingly. So click, and now we can see the change instantly because we are rebuilding the UI each time there is a change in this bookmarks provider. So we finally have some data in our bookmark, and let's try to add more. So add this one and add this as well. Now our bookmark logic is complete. So let's look at the design for our favorite page. Back to the favorite page, we only have a text in our app bar that says favorite. The first thing we are going to do is to convert from a stateless widget into a consumer widget. So click on this and then convert it to consumer widget, and we need to import Riverpod related stuff. So we can then use our bookmarks provider here. So the first thing we want to do is to watch for changes in our bookmarks. So I'm going to create a variable here to represent the bookmarks, and that is going to be set to ref.watch bookmarks provider. So we have our bookmark state, and within the body of our app or scaffold, we are going to listen for when we have data error and loading. So when we are in the loading state, as usual, we want to show in the center of the screen a spinner. When we have error, we want to also show that in the center of the screen as a text. When we have any data from this provider, we want to do something a little bit complex. Now the first thing we want to do is we want to check if this data is empty. If it's empty, it means there are no bookmarks, so we need to show the empty UI state. So let's first make that check. If data is empty, it means no bookmark here. So let's design a widget for that. I'm going to return in the center of the page a column with some children. Now the first child is going to be an image, so an image, and the second child will be a text. In order to add this image, I have an illustration here which will all be part of this project. You can check the GitHub repo for this illustration. And I'm going to create a directory at the root of my project and call it assets. Now within assets, I'm going to paste this image, which is this book I found on a website. I'll leave a link to the website in the description below. So this wouldn't work yet. We need to add this to our asset. So go to a prospect.yaml, and where it says assets, uncomment assets like this, and you can read the last line. This is a directory that I want to add. So I'm going to just add my assets directory like this and put a / here. This is all that you need to do if you have the same structure as mine. Now we need to close our app and rerun for asset to link properly. So I'm going to close the app and rerun it. Now we go back to the favorites page. We see that we have an error here. Type compatible dynamic is not a subtype of less dynamic in typecast. So that's coming from the complete recipe, if I'm very sure about that, and specifically our tags, because that's where we have a list. So in order to fix this, let's just map over the tags, and for each of them, let's type it as a string, call it an element, and then the final thing should be a list. So map over here should be to list like this. Now let's try again, maybe a hot restart. So in order to fix this, I had to come here and then change the list type declaration for the males back to a final, so something that we are unsure of, because get values doesn't really return as a list as I assumed. That fixed the issue. Now we don't have any errors, so we can proceed to our page, which is favorites page, and work on our UI. Now in this column, we are going to show our image.assets, and we are looking for assets/recipe book.png. Now we can't see anything because our data is not empty. We've added some recipes in the past. So how do we fix this? Let's just invert this logic to be if data is not empty. Now we can see our page. So let's work on this. We first need some kind of space. So I'm going to put a sizer box here, or you can also use the spacing property in the column. I'm going to give it a height of 10 and put a text here that says no favorite yet. Also, let's add some styles. Because of that, I'm going to create a theme variable here and set a theme.off_context, and then add a style of theme.text_theme.title large. Now we need to center this. Although we are using the center widget, it's not centering because of the column. The column is taking full height, so we need to center everything with the column using the main axis alignment and setting it to center. I want us to constrain this image a bit, so I'm going to use a constrained box. You can also set a fixed width here, so something like 300 will look okay. This would work. You can also use a constraint box. There are so many ways to do this. Now this for when we don't have data. So let's change it back to if data is empty. If data isn't empty, then we want to show, instead of returning now, we want to show a different UI. So the UI we want to show would be in a list view. So let's first have a list view with children. Now, what do we want to show? We want to show a group version of the bookmarks. So we want to show all bookmarks grouped under the same category, just like I showed in the intro video. So in order to do that, we first need to group the data returned from this provider. And one easy way we can do that is by creating an extension method on the list type. So if you don't know what that means, let's have a look. Here, I am going to create a file under utils and call it extensions.dat. And this file will hold our group logic. So extension, group extension on list. What this means is that we are adding a functionality to the list type. So that's an easy way to add functionalities to build types in that. Now we want this group extension to be typed. So I'm going to give it a generic type called T on a list called T, which means they just have the same type. Within this, we are going to have a method called group by. So what group by basically does is if we have a key like category, it's going to group all items within that list that have the same key. That's basically group by. So at the end of the day, we are going to have a map that has the key we want and then the list of items under that particular key. So in this case, if we have pork as a key, the value is going to be a list of meals that falls under the pork category. So we are going to finally return a map of a key, and the key can be anything. That's why we are using generic over here. So a key, we are calling it key, and the data is going to be a list of the same type of the list we are applying this on. So if you have a list of complete recipe, then when we group it, we should have a key of maybe string, and then the data should still be a list of complete recipe, not anything else. So it means that our map should have a key of k and a list of t, which is the same thing, like this. And now let's call it group by, like this. Now we have some issues over here because the type isn't, well, we are not working on the type well. We first need to add this k over here, like this, and now group by is a bit satisfied, but group by doesn't know what k is, and the body will also return now. Right, we're not returning anything for now. So what do? Let's pass in a function. Now this function will tell us what key we want to use. So for instance, if we want to use the category, it's going to be something like list.groupby, and then we pass in the callback function, and the callback function is going to be maybe e.category. Let me show you an example. So for instance, we have .where, right? .where, it takes a callback function, and then it performs some check, which is tag dot is not empty. So .groupby will also take a callback function and then return the key that I want to group by. So back here, group by takes in key. We have a function called t key function. So this function should return us the key, which is key. So let's say in this case a string key, right? The function should take in t, because each time we loop with this group by function, we want to make sure that we have access to the individual item. If we have a list of complete recipe, each time we loop over complete recipe, we should have access to each individual item within the list. So that is going to be the t. You can always replace t with complete recipe and k with the category string, and that should make sense. So let's first create an empty map over here, k, and then a list of t, and set that to maybe result, right, or map, anyhow you decide to call it. Maybe this is going to be the result. Then let's return this result so that this function will be complete. So this is the final thing we want to return. Now let's loop over each item. So each item in the list. So for t elements in this, what it means, we are just looping for each item within this list. This refers to the list. What do you want to do? We want to get the key. So in this case, we call the key function, we give you the element, and this is going to be our callback, which returns maybe the category. And if you don't understand this, I recommend maybe Googling or asking ChatGPT. So let's first check if map or result, not map, if result dot contains key, then what do we want to do? We want to access this key and then add the element to it. Else, we create a new field and then put this element there. So basically, all that we are doing in this group by function, we get a key, which is what we provide. So for instance, category, and we check if that category is already there. If that category already exists, let's just add the next item to it. If it doesn't exist, we create a field with that key, and then we set its value to a list with the first item being that element. And there is the group by function. So let's use this function. On the favorite page, we want to group by category. So this is how it's going to look like. Final grouped bookmarks is going to be data, which is our list of complete recipes, dot group by, and you see we can access it like any other method on a list, and now we can pass in our callback function, which is the key function. So bookmark.category, which means that for each item we are grouping it by a key called bookmark.category, and it's going to give us group bookmarks over here. Now within this group bookmark, this is the only information we want to show in the list view, right? We want to have a list of grouped cards or grouped recipes. So instead of having children, we are just going to loop over this group bookmarks and show something like a card for each group. So this is how it's going to look like. Grouped bookmarks dot entries. The reason why we are using entries is because we want to get the key and then the value at the same time. So entries dot map, and for each item, which is entry, you can call it entry, we want to have the category, which is going to be e.key, and then the recipes under that category, which is going to be e.value. And maybe we can return some column over here to take away the error. So return column like this, and also make sure we are converting this to a list so we don't have any errors. So this is what we have. We have the category, which is going to be the key, and the values are going to be the recipes under that particular category. From here, the only thing left is the UI. So what UI are we looking at? we first want to have a column. Now within that column, we are going to have a row that will hold the name of the category and the button, text button for see more. So let's quickly put that one up. We have a column, and then we are going to have the header part of this card, right? So the header part is going to be in a row, maybe children, and the header part to be here. So row with children. And the first child is going to be text, which is the name of the category. So text, and then we have the category here, the string category here. And when I save, we should see beef, vegetarian, miscellaneous here, because those are the categories for the recipes we bookmarked. Now let's add a little bit of styling to this text before we do anything else. So style, I want us to use the title large text style like this. And let's also add some padding to this list view. So have padding all around with a value of 16, and that's going to look okay. Now in order to have some space among the categories, we are going to wrap the column in a padding widget. So wrap with widgets, and we are looking for padding. I want to give a padding only bottom with a value of maybe 14. So we have some space here. Now next in the row, I want to put the see more button here. So text button, and the unpressed will be an empty function for now. The chart is going to be a text that says see more like this. And let's have space between, so we can use main axis alignment and then set it to space between. And this is what we have. After the header, this is where we want to have the actual body of the card. Now we want to constrain everything in a sizer box to a height of 200. So I'm going to have a sizer box here and give it a height of 200. Now within this sizer box, how do we come up with the UI I just showed you? So if you've forgotten, this is how it looks like. We have our title and this, then we have these two cards, a big one and then two smaller ones. A way we can do this is to have a row which we divide into two parts, so the left part and then the right part. Then we further divide the right part into two. So that's the easiest way I found to create a layout like this. So within the sizer box, we are going to have a row with children. Now the first child will be the left part, and then the second child will be the right part. So we are going to have comments here, left part of card and then right part of card. The left part is going to be a card, just like all our UIs, card, and then with an image. So card, and the child is going to be a cache network image like this. And the image URL is going to be the first recipe in the list. So we can access that using recipes, which is the recipe for this particular category, .first .image URL. And we can set the fit for this to boxfit.cover. So when we save, we immediately see this over here. Now we can add the cache network image stuff. So we have a placeholder when we are loading, we show a spinner, and then we have an error widget in case we fail to load this image. So error widgets and then placeholder. Now it's going to be for the left part of the card. Looks good. Now the right part of the card will be divided into two. So with the right part, we have the top and then the bottom. So the right part of the card would be a column. Now if you have a row in a column, in a column, in a row, it becomes a little bit difficult to manage. So with this row, we are going to make sure that the second part of the card, which is the right part of the card, only takes the available space after we've laid out the first part of the card. What I mean is that we are going to wrap it in an expanded widget. So expanded, and the child is going to be the actual column we need. Now within this column, this is where we are going to have our top part of the card and then bottom part of the card. So top part of the card, this is going to be divided equally. So if we look at the completed version of this project, we see that the division is equal. So top part of the card, in order to have this division, we are going to use the flexible widget. So we divide both parts into two equal parts. Now flexible, there will be two flexible widgets like this. Flexible with a child, another flexible with a child. And this is going to be the bottom part of the card. Within the child, we are just going to have each of them a normal card like this. So a card, and I'm going to copy this and put it there, and then also copy this and put it there. So the bottom part and the top part and the left part, they are all the same. They are all cards, just like that. And if we go back to look at the one we are working on, we see something like this. Now let's make sure that the cards fill the available space. So in order to do that, we are going to set the width on the image to be 100%. It's going to be double.max finite, and then over here too, on the image width is going to be double.max finite. Now we are almost getting there. The next logic we want to tackle is on the right part of this card. We want to show a different image based on the number of recipes we've added. So if we've added 2 recipes, then we want to show the first card as first recipe, the second top card as the second recipe. If it's 3 recipes or more, then we want to show the first 3 recipes over here. So how do we do that? Instead of accessing recipes.first.image URL for all the cards, we are going to make a simple check. So for the top part of the card, which is this part, we want to check if we have more than 1 recipe, so 2 and upwards. If we have 2 and upwards, then it means that we can use the second image. Let's stick with the first image. So let's check for recipes.length is greater than 1, which means we have 2 or more. Then we want to use the second item .image URL. Else we want to use the first item, which is the first recipe that will always be there. So recipes, this time I'm going to use the array index.image URL and image URL. And I made some mistake here, so I'm going to remove that and try it again. The recipes.length is greater than 1. Then let's use recipes second item image URL, else recipes first item image URL. So when we save, we don't see anything because all these categories have just 1 recipe. So let's still come to the recommended for you section and then add 1 more recipe to the beef section. So this, and then add it here like that. So after adding 1 more recipe to the beef category, we can see that this shows the image of the second item in the list, whilst the last card still maintains the image from the first recipe. Now let's quickly make the same check for the bottom card on the right side. So I'm going to copy the image URL check over here and then paste it here. And instead of checking for the length greater than 1, we are going to check for a length greater than 2. And if that is the case, we access the third element, else we fall back to the first element. And since we just have only 2 recipes under this category, we still show the first image, which is the first recipe. Now we can test this out lastly by looking for a beef meal. So I found one here, and let's add this to our favorites. And now we come here, we can see that all the 3 images have changed to their respective meals. Now this is where we are going to end today's section. In the next video, we will look at how to refactor what we've written to make it much easier to read and maintain. We will also look at how to show the number of recipes on the third card, as well as build the see more page. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe. If you don't understand anything, put it in the comment section and I'll attend to you. I will see you in the next one.